Some stories are impossible to forget. Some signs, as subtle as they are, seem to warn about something inevitable. Premonitions, whispers of fate, or just coincidences. There are tragedies that leave deep marks, and sometimes secrets that insist on staying among us. Flight AF447, which mysteriously disappeared in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, left not only families in mourning, but also inexplicable reports that surround those who somehow had contact with this accident. Dreams that warn the inevitable, echoes of voices under the sea, presences that seem to wander restlessly. In this account, you will know stories of those who felt, saw, and heard what cannot be explained. But before continuing, get ready. Some farewells are never definitive. My companion, my Guilherme, was always a very centered man, worked as engineer, and spent much of his time on trips to work. At that time I would go to Paris in an important congress. The company had marked everything for months. Hotel reserved passage, purchased closed suitcase. But about 2 weeks before boarding, he started to have a strange dream. He woke up in middle of dawn, sweating nervously. At first, I faced how pure anxiety. I thought that it was normal. Tiredness, right only. He was telling me details, and I tell you, it was to freeze the spine he described, to be on an ordinary plane. Everyone sitting relaxed, but suddenly the water was beginning to drain through the roof cracks as if something were broken from there. A strong wig, people kept acting as if nothing was happening, but he felt a terror deep, as if something stopped his breathing, as if he had arrested for an invisible squeeze, he said, and the same dream was repeated 1-3 times each time. More intense, more and more suffocating. He woke up panting and debating and looked at me, as if I had fled a triz of the darkness. There was a night when he was so shaken that sat on the edge of the head, with a head down. I begged him to tell me what was rolling. He stared at me and said something I never forgot. I don't want to travel. Something is not right, I feel. It tried to cheer him, said it was just exhaustion, that he needed to rest. But he was serious, very serious, that started moving with me, because I never saw Guilherme that way, never. On the day of going to the airport, he was distant, silent with thought, far before leaving. He hugged me so firm that he seemed not to let go. When he retreated, looked at me and said, "He cares, and pray for me." I answered with a smile, a little without understanding, but something inside me got hammering it in the head. When the news came from the accident, was as if the time freezed. I was in the kitchen, passing the coffee with the TV on the news. When I saw the ad being prominent in the beginning, I didn't care much about reporters spoke of a plane that crashed in full, kills, a major accident. My heart accelerated, but I did not want to accept. I was static until I saw the flight number was the flight of Guilherme. My hand slipped and the cup fell, cracked the whole sink, my ears. Zunaram was like, if I had taken a blow to my chest, I couldn't breathe. I tried to call his cell phone, but it was useless, just played non-stop, so the phone of my house started to sound, the company of his known relatives, everyone wondering if I had any information. But I didn't. I had nothing, just knew that my husband was on that flight and would not come back. In the following days, my house became something like a wake without coffin. I don't even know how many people passed by each one, commenting on hypotheses, talking about the search, trying to give me words of comfort, but deep down, it was all empty. But the worst was yet to come. In the first week after the disaster, I hardly slept. Every time I closed my eyes, felt a weight, strange, hanging around the house. I can't describe. It was like I wasn't alone, was a presence that did not bring me relief. On the contrary, left me goosebumps from head to the feet. Fourth night, that the first strange thing happened, should go from 3 in the morning, and I turned around the bed without being able to nap when I heard 3 dried beats in the room door. Tock, tock, my heart almost came out my mouth. I kept lying down. trying to believe it was something in my head. But so if you repeated tock, 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 I suddenly got up, the whole body shaking. I went to the door, very slowly collected the ear in the wood to see if I realized something on the other side. Total silence. But I felt the presence of someone there. My chest climbed and down very fast. All my instincts shouted. So I didn't open that door, but my reason tried to find an explanation. Maybe some relative, I don't know. I turned the doorknob very slowly and opened. There was nothing. The hall was dark, just a weak light. From the street illuminated the gate in the background. I took a step out. I looked on the empty sides, but the smell, that burnt smell, arrived with everything. Was not a cigarette or something on fire, was strong, metallic and damp at the same time. I felt the neck frown. I closed the door running and locked it, leaning against her, breathing deep without knowing what to think. But then suddenly a cold wind has passed for the rooms, and it was impossible to have wind because everything was closed. The dawn was the first but not the last. After that, I convinced myself that everything could be the result of my trauma, the pain for the loss to my head getting disturbed. But I knew it wasn't just that. That continued every night. 3 dry beats at the same space spaced, and the same stillness on the other side. At first, I still looked at the magical eye, but there was never anyone. If I opened the door, the smell of burnt invaded the room, made me nauseated. And with a strong pain in my head one day, I saw a figure near the gate, had no definite form. Not like a real person, was just a dense shadow in the dimness of the yard. But what really terrified me was when the sounds indoors one night, should be Thursday or Friday. Since the accident I woke up of, overcoming with a noise coming from the room, was a soft, rhythmic noise, as if passing the nail wood on the table. I was petrified on the bed, listening to scrape, scrape. I checked the phone. 3:57 I took a deep breath and created the courage to leave the room. I walked to the room with my heart fired. When I illuminated the dining table, I was startled. There were scratches on the thin surface, made as if someone had written something at touch. I felt there was a sentence there, and when I understood what it was, almost like to pray for me. I froze, was the phrase Guilherme had told me. Before leaving for boarding, I ran back to the room I locked inside and started praying uncontrolled. I took the third. That was my mother, and kept holding hard. I barely. He endured. Standing from there, everything only increased. I started listening to steps in the hallway. Were slow, dragged steps, sometimes listened to whispers, almost incomprehensible, weak. And the mirrors were blurred as if someone had taken a hot bath, but I wasn't even wearing the shower. So the night came when I saw him the most. Clearly I was sleeping badly and left a small light on in the room because the total pitch I was suffocating me to be. Around 4 in the morning, when I felt a sink from the mattress. No, when someone sits beside you, this unmistakable feeling. My heart shot, I thought. With my eyes closed, but curiosity or fear forced me to peek, and there he was, Guilherme. But it wasn't. He was really sitting on his back on the edge of the bed, dressed in the same shirt, who used it to travel, but the body was crooked, the neck half pendant, and the shoulders trembled as if I was cold. My hair dripped, still wet. I wanted to shout, but my voice disappeared, so he spun his head slowly, seemed to hear my thoughts. His eyes, God heaven, had no eyes, just black holes in cavities that suck everything. He opened his mouth. No sound came out, but I read on your lips what he said. I didn't want to go there. Everything went out. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the sick, soaked bedroom, squeezing my third of mine. Light blinked, and the clock showed 8, and a few eyeless face and neck shifted haunt me to this day. I felt on the skin that it was not a nightmare. He was there, felt the weight beside me in bed, the cold of that figure, the water dripping from the hair. I knew that I needed to do something that morning. I ran to church, even not going much. I looked for the priest. I told everything from the beginning to the end. Guilherme's nightmares, the beats, the apparitions. He listened to me without interrupting, my arms crossed, and when I ended, he said his pain and his are arrested. In this plan you both need liberation me. And he marked a seventh-day mass. Having spent time, I called family and friends, and we met in the church during the celebration. I had a strange relief, as if they took a heavy blanket off my back. But not yet. The solution was complete. The same night I lit a candle in the room. I put a picture of the Guilherme, and I started praying. I spoke loudly, even with the voice failing. Guilherme, if you are here, please listen. Forgive me. I know you didn't want to go, but now you are over. You need to rest. Go to peace. I stayed there for a few minutes with my eyes closed until a cold wind traveled my body. The candle flame shook, almost went out, and at that moment I heard one last beaten, a smooth one as one, until soon, and then silence. I never had those noises, never seen shadows, or I smelled the burnt of burnt nightmares disappeared. The house calmed down. I felt that he finally left, but to this day when I hear the noise by plane passing in the sky, I remember Guilherme and everything that happened. And me, I wonder, he felt before traveling that something was very wrong. Well, I already knew the end that I awaited him, and I also wonder how many other people have foreshadows equal before its destinations are sealed too. I always worked at Galeão Airport for many years. I witnessed countless scenes, people begging because they lost the flight, families in tears, saying goodbye to famous, passing by, passing down without pay attention, but had a situation days after the disaster of flight AF447 that I never forget. At the time, I did the security in the night shift, and this period is usually kind of sinister. Airport is silent, the movement greatly decreases, some areas are practically empty. This happened around midnight. I was checking the flight departure gates, international, looking for some lost passenger, until I noticed a seated man alone, in a dark, lay-down chair, well aligned with a handbag on the leg, and fixed look at any point caught the eye because he looked displaced, was as if waiting. A flight that had been departed for hours, and I noticed an even bigger weird holding a slightly dirty, crumpled ticket, as if he had been wet and then dried in the wind. When I stopped beside him, I did my job. Good night, sir. Okay, you need help. He turned his face to me slowly, his face without much expression, as if he was there, and at the same time I was not lost my flight. He whispered in a dragged voice, "But they will go back to pick me up." A shiver traveled my back immediately. I imagined that he had lost some connection, but something in it made me freeze. I asked what the flight was, sir. He did not answer. Reddy just turned the ticket and I could read AF447. My pulse fired. Flight AF447, the one who had fallen days ago in the middle of the ocean without survivors. When looking again at his face, something changed, seemed pale, with a more empty look, and his shadow was denser in the yellow light of the lobby. Blinked, and he was not more there. The chair was empty, without steps, without sound, as if it had never existed. At this time, I felt the blood freezing was like taking an electric discharge, but inside, immediately I examined the corridor, looking for the man to see if he had run or something, but nothing. The hall was deserted. Only if he heard the noise, distant from a cleaning cart. I tried to blink again, rubbing my eyes. I couldn't have imagined everything I said to him. I held a note there. I turned and fired at the camera room, needed to see the recordings. When I arrived, I spoke to the colleague who was on duty to review the filming of the last minute. I explained what happened, that I found a passenger who disappeared, and he laughed, thinking he was drunk, sleeping around. But when we started to see the cameras, We saw only me walking in front of the chair and talking to the void. The man did not appear in the image. The chair was empty all the time. In the video, I leaned my head as if he heard someone, then retreated scared. The color disappeared from my face. I was cold. This was not right. My colleague was amazed at me, saying that I wasn't kidding. I was not a joke. I saw that guy with my own eye. And he had a note from AF447. He stopped smiling, so we were silent. When my radio began to squeak a low chiado, and in the middle of the noise I recognized that voice. I've lost the flight, but they will pick me up. I pulled the radio out of the perplexed waist. I looked at the display without understanding. There was no active call, any broadcast. We were only standing there in that room with the chiado echoing. Then the sound disappeared and the silence that was later seemed heavier. My colleague looked at me with wide eyes and I didn't know what to answer. I was crazy about there. I needed to return to that boarding gate, but when I arrived in that corner everything was normal. But the chairs were a little out of place, as if someone had pulled one of them. Deep down, there was a wet, wrinkled paper. My whole body trembled close with care. I picked up the tip and saw that it was a departure card. From the flight AF447, the name was blurred, only the first two letters, Jack. It was enough for me to release the paper as if burned my hand. I backed away with my head running like that had stopped there. If there was no one, I took the radio, breathing deeply, and asked Central, the passenger list of AF447. Other side hesitated and asked why. My order took a deep breath, and I said, I think I saw one of them. The radio was unanswered for a few seconds and returned with a low voice. We don't talk about it. I felt as if I had taken a punch in the stomach. It was serious, that was real. I went to the room rest, but the corridor now seemed darker, as if everything was heavy in the air. Stepped looking around because it seemed that someone watched me, and when I arrived at the parking lot, I entered the car, connected the engine and looked in the mirror. By reflection, I almost died from my heart when I saw a man of dark suit sitting on the back seat. But his eyes were totally white, turned back in a jump. And there was no one, just the smell of sea Reese's impregnated in the air. I dropped my job in that shift. I asked to change industry and to this day avoid that lobby. But the hammer phrase in my head, I already lost the flight, but they will pick me up. And I wonder if one day they go. A few days after what happened, I was still too shaken. But there was something that showed that things would not get easier. Everything happened after a tragedy that hit me brutally. I was alone at home, the thoughts flying to everything I lost. When the phone touched unknown number, I was wondering whether it answered or not. But I answered because something impelled me. When placing the device in the ear, I did not hear any fulfillment, just a muffled sound, as if the connection out of the water or something was weighed, almost a roar, and seemed to exercise a strange pressure. I was quiet, waiting for something more, until the breath stood out, was slow, loaded, and almost hurt to hear, like someone stuck in a tight, air-free place. My heart fired. I didn't have the courage to hang up. I wanted to understand what was. Suddenly, the sound became clearer, and it seemed to me that someone was trying to form a word, did not identify. Just, but it froze me there. The call fell. The silence took over. I spent a while without moving the phone. My body trembled and did not understand what I witnessed the next day. And the other, I received more equal calls, always at random times. Whenever I became more vulnerable in quiet, I felt that fear grow with each touch when I attended. It was the same muffled noise and that almost agonizing heavy breath. Sometimes it seemed even clearer, as if it was getting close. But there was never anyone saying something complete. I tried to return the number but never existed, always fell straight without completing the call. I started telling my relatives and friends. Some thought I was freaking out after suffering. Others were terrified and recommended that I seek spiritual help. That's exactly what I did. With a certain prejudice, I sought an older guy known for dealing with things beyond what we see. He heard me describing all the strange, so-called, and what I felt in the end told me that some souls get stuck in bridges that should not cross, and that maybe someone wanted to give me a message, not of peace but of confusion, even as if they tried to come back at all costs. I came home without knowing if I should believe or not. But that night, one more phone, and this time, the voice was no longer muffled. It came out clear, but still distant. It was as if you whisper, "I am here, is the last chance." I felt such a fear that I could barely hold the phone. The call fell again. I tried to return the call, but nothing. Only gave number, non-existent. Those words echoed in my head, exhausting me mentally until a religious relative suggested that I go to a specific place to say a prayer of farewell and take something personal from the deceased. To this ritual, I delivered a keychain who belonged to my family. Member was just what came to mind after the ceremony. The calls ceased, but at night, next one last time, the phone rang and there was a quieter voice. "Thanks, you helped me." And then it cut. Definitely never heard anything after that, but the fear that something like that happens again always throbes in the bottom of your mind, as if you have another parallel world we do not understand. And this was not the only intriguing story that marked me. Also had the case of an old acquaintance, his Christian. Fisherman from a half-isolated region near Angra dos Reis. He was a silent man, rude, that only opened his mouth to say serious things. And one afternoon after the tragedy happened with the flight, he told me something that crashed me with fear. He was fishing alone on a apparently calm. The sea was quiet, but he always said that sometimes the calm of the sea hides something sinister on the horizon. When he saw a figure floating through the reflection, thought it was a trunk or debris, but something was different, and the fisherman was approaching without imagining what he would. When he came close, he saw clearly a man wearing a black suit, as if he left straight from a ballroom, but had a disturbing detail. The fabric was intact and dry, as if it had no contact with the water. His Crispim realized that it was impossible, in that no body would be intact like this in the Sea of Angra that is treacherous. Normally the person sinks or floats in a pitiful state, but that man floated with his back, without. Any marked in the body was illogical. The fisherman so shouted for colleagues who were far away asking help, but when he looked again to the body, he disappeared without leaving trail. The sea was still calm, without waves, without remains. Anything like swallowing that figure in silence. Your Crispim was there, not knowing how to react when the other fisherman arrived. He preferred to silence, to say that passed the impression. But in the end, he began to have nightmares non-stop, and said he saw the same man. Of the suit, stopped in front of his house at dawn. For some time, his Crispim almost I didn't speak, and one day it just disappeared. No one knows if he got lost in the sea or fled that torment. Once and for all, I joined the team myself that helped rescue parts of the Atlantic Fund plane. Was as dangerous as necessary work. We were about 4,000 meters below surface. When it all started, we came with modern equipment, but that below is another world, something we do not control. Sea pressure is relentless and silence is absolute. We were talking to each other on the radio when a strange buzzing began, as if it were interference, but it was too strong and charged with a bad feeling. The other divers, they stopped looking at the frightened sides, so that buzz turned into murmurs, voices distant that seemed afflicted, asking for help in the beginning. I thought it was technical failure, but the voice was so human, so distressed that I could feel the panic. Suddenly radio chew strong, and we hear with sharp help. Help. We are trapped. Not. We were able to breathe. My blood galled. It was impossible to have someone alive down there, not after all. This time, but the voice did not cease, was still increasingly clear. I looked to the side, and one of the colleagues simply dropped out of formation, desperately trying to return to the surface, as if he had seen a ghost, might have even in that darkness. You can't be sure of anything. The interference increased. Our real communication was cut, and only behelmed supplications. I was feeling that someone watched us under nothing. I thought I saw a shadow if moving in the turned waters, as if something of huge size passed fast. I froze. I didn't know whether it was my imagination or not. I only know that the heart wanted to get out of my chest when we go up. He could speak the team. If he looked in panic, the voices were in our mind for a long time, and some did not want to return to that place, is as if that place kept echoes of those who were without having a chance to say goodbye. While I swam back to the base, the pressure in the water increased. It seemed that the ocean itself, I wanted to crush. The lights of our equipment flashed, and I felt something surrounding me, as if trying to pull me back to the bottom. A cold traveled my body, and the voices did not stop. It was pure desperation resonating on my phone, as if they wanted to hold me there too. When finally we reached the surface, the radio went back to work, but I was no longer the same new I had. Listening to something impossible, and that would mark me forever. It was on a hot night, on the mud road near Rio das Ostras, that I experienced what many they would call crazy were 9 and little. And I drove coming back from normal service, but felt a chill. Something did not fit into the silent landscape. Suddenly, I saw a man stopped in road of the back of his back, wearing a thick sweater incompatible with that hellish heat. I thought he was going to ask for a ride, but he was just motionless, and when I passed him, his head turned quickly, as if observing myself in the mirror of the car. I had the impression that there was no face. The air cooled inside the vehicle, and a heavy smell set in. Accelerated, wanting to leave, but saw it rear-view mirror that he accompanied the car running, without emitting any noise, as if sliding. I accelerated more, but it appeared on the side of the car, following my speed and looking at me fixed, as if I wanted to stop in it. The engine started to fail. My car choked, and, dying of fear, I leaned against. I tried to call again, but nothing happened. Was then that he appeared in front of the car, staring at me directly on that pitch, with the empty road. His features were only a void. As if someone had ripped the strokes, I was unable to breathe. The lighthouse gave a quick wink, illuminating his countenance, and saw something like a skewed smile that terrified me in an attempt to escape. I tried again to start the engine, but with the weak lights, this man was now very close, put the car moving, but the feeling was that the air was dense, as if the road had gained life and wanted to arrest me. The man, I did weird gestures. I didn't hear anything, but I was sure he was trying to communicate somehow. The shadows around, they danced, as if more figures were lurking. With my heart fired, I opened the window to scream, but nothing came out of my mouth. My voice simply disappeared when I turned to the back seat. On an impulse of despair, I swore to see someone there, but at the blinking, there was nothing. The strange smell took over again. A suffocating smell of something burned and molded together. I was taken by the certainty that I would not escape. That figure was not human, was something beyond of this world, watching me as if I wanted to drag me to darkness. And that's when the light of the car erased once and for all. I was in the full dark, trying to breathe, and my heart in my throat. I heard whispers, weak, seemed like a distant voice, muffled, as if I came from behind the walls. I didn't understand anything, but I sounded like a macabre song. And then I saw that he was in the window, touching me on the glass, staring at that faceless face, but now sketching a cavity in place of the mouth. Was horrible. It seemed that the night itself took over the road. I had the feeling that there were more beings around, watching me, prepared for a final attack. However, when I thought everything was lost, I heard a click. The lighthouse rekindled for a moment, and the man was no longer. They're only that the finger marks were on the glass as if they had burned the light glass. I left driving there without looking back, praying to never pass again by that road. Since then I avoid that stretch. If anyone doubts what I saw, I prefer not discussing. Each one has their own fears. But I know what I witnessed, and I know there are things out there that we could not explain. If you have arrived here and followed these reports until the end, do not forget to show your support. Let your like, and comment telling what you think, and subscribe to the channel to continue seeing more mysterious stories. And if you endured firmly until the end, leaves a ghost emoji in the comments, so I will know that you are part of the fearless ones who face these tales until the last line. And if you want to join our community, further consider becoming a member. Helps a lot to strengthen our space and maintains the flame of suspense lit we see each other in next.